Welcome to Kink Geek with your hosts, Step and Tams.
We're here to take a nerd's eye view of everything from sexuality to pop culture and whatever we hit along the way.
Thank you for joining us, and we hope you have a real good time.
Hi, welcome to episode 90 of Kink Geek.
10 from 100.
Oh boy.
That's the point at which I believe they syndicate TV shows.
100 episodes?
Yeah, I think it's at the 100 mark.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know anything about that. I do know that I'm drinking tea out of a TARDIS, which is extra cool.
I gave you my TARDIS mug because...
Why?
Because I wanted this one, because I wanted to wrap my hands around this one like this, and it's wider and broader.
I see.
Yeah.
All right, well...
I'm very mug-specific, depending on the day.
I generally just like a large volume, simple-shaped mug.
That's sort of...
It has a little bit of a weird...
curve in?
Yeah.
I find that it keeps the tea hotter longer.
Yeah, too hot.
I see.
That's fine. Thank you.
Okay. So anyway, that was our talk about tea.
Uh-huh.
So how are you
Tea's
doing?
very important here in the United...
Kingdom of Us?
Kingdom of Us, yes. United Kingdom of Us.
He was sleeping until
in
2
Canada,
seconds ago.
where
Hi,
we are.
Salem. So how are you doing?
I am well. I have a lovely cup of tea. I've just had an Nanaimo bar, which is also a bit of Canadian cuisine.
Oh, so good.
And I'm here with a lippy boy
Hello, Salem.
to talk about something interesting to you all out there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm feeling a little silly this evening. I don't know if you could tell, but
That's okay.
it's all right. We'll get through this.
Yes. So we're going to start with our update.
Sure.
So it's been a week. We had a really nice Monday. We had people over to the house for the first time for dinner, which was cool, friends of ours.
Mm-hmm.
And we also had people over for a housewarming / draft
Oh, man.
on
It was
Saturday.
a lot of fun. We talked about that in great detail on the Knowledge Pool podcast, which we also do. So
You
you
can
can go and check out
that out,
the draft
yeah.
info there. But we had grown-up type people over to have an actual meal around our actual table.
And then we played a very old board game called Therapy from the early 80s,
man.
which is amazingly bad and awesome.
It's a Trivial Pursuit style game,
Yeah.
and it's all like personal questions or factoids about like human sciences, like social sciences,
Yeah.
etc. It's entertaining mostly because it's so dated.
Yeah, and what's really cool is they cite all of their sources at the bottom of each card. So you can say, okay, this is from this study circa 1962 or 1984, and it'll give you some context to make a better guess. I think I posted a couple of the actual questions to our Twitter account because they were just so funny and ridiculous.
Yeah, there were a few that like, oh, this is going to be racist, isn't it? Well, that was about as good as that could have turned out.
Yeah, so it was super fun, and we had a really nice evening. And having people over meant that we actually hung some of our art up in the house. The house is looking...
Yeah, like a home. It also meant that we finally got our rig set up in the office where we're going to be podcasting. So if you notice any sound variation, we're still figuring out the bugs, like the fish tank. But
Well, that's my fault for not refilling the water first.
This
but
is
yes.
going to be our new permanent location. Mm-hmm. So feel pretty good about that.
Yeah, that feels good. Mm-hmm. I'm quite happy about it. And today we replaced our shower curtain. We were using a dollar store one, which was like tissue paper. It looked really cool, but it lasted a month.
You're just after Mummy's tea, aren't you?
Yes, he is.
The draft cat just wants the tea.
So, as a housewarming gift, Laura gifted us a gift card to go get a shower curtain. So,
yes,
we did that. And our Chromecast. That's going to be exciting.
Yes. So, we'll finally have all of our things set up the way we want to.
Yeah, so that's really cool. The other big excitement for this week, and by excitement I mean horrible nightmare from hell, is hi Salem, is I had to go to the dentist this week. I have a wicked phobia of the dentist. And I come by it naturally. I'm sure we've talked about this before for other things. I metabolize very quickly the freezing agents that I'm given. And inevitably, there's always pain at some point involved. And it's the kind of pain that I really dislike, that sudden, I'm not expecting it, sharp, stinging pain.
Well, it's tooth pain. That's cited as the worst pains. Like,
Yeah.
a 4 on the scale is a mild toothache.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
there you go.
So I went in because they thought I had a small cavity, and it turned out I didn't. But they decided...
Huzzah.
Yeah, well, I have deep pockets in my teeth, and he decided to just seal one of them up a little bit just to preemptively strike so that there was no chance of getting a cavity.
Sure.
But they found a tiny little one at the top, and they had to fill it. So they froze it, and then they did the other thing first. So by the time they got to the filling, to do the filling, and they had to do a bunch of drilling to get, the little bit of decay out and whatever, they dinged me with the drill in a spot that wasn't frozen. Not to mention the driving the needle through the soft palate of your mouth. Oh.
We probably should have put a
Trigger
warning at the start of this.
Goodness knows I was triggered. So I was a basket case to start with. Like, I was very shaky and I was a mess. Going in, sitting down. And when they told me they were going to do this other filling, I started to get so upset that I was almost in tears because I hadn't mentally prepared myself for this. It's not something I knew about. And I'm trying to stay in the chair and not run off. And I'm trying to be, I don't want them to feel bad because it's not their fault.
And did you mention that this is dental students?
Oh, no. We're in a program in which we get our dental work. It's local to where we are. There's a dental school in our city. So we get our dental stuff done for free. And the exchange is fourth-year dental students do the work under the supervision of, there are various supervisors wandering around. And they've always been fantastic. Even if they have the slightest question, they bring their supervisor over and they're really nice. But they don't have a lot of practical experience under their belt. So while they may be technically perfectly skilled at what they do, those things that you develop over time, such as, okay, I'm going to put a little bit of air now. Oh, I'm going to suck your cheek up through this massive suction thing now. Oh, little prick as I put the needle in. They don't think to tell you.
Yeah.
So, of course, I jump and get upset, and she's upset because she's hurting me. She gouged me twice with the pick because she was nervous. So it was a disaster all around. But at the end of the day, it got done. So I was thinking, and this is not anything to do with the topic at hand later on, but I wondered, we talk about BDSM being good for all sorts of things, and I'm wondering if there is something we can try working on to work on my phobia around mouth. Like, I don't even like you looking in my mouth. It's just a thing. It freaks me out. So I'm wondering if we should set aside some time at some point to work on that, and then I don't want to work on that kind of pain in my mouth because it's too much, but something similar, some sort of unexpected little pain when we're scheduled to work on it. Like, not when I'm cooking dinner and all of a sudden I get a thwap and you're like, see, we're working on it.
Yeah, no, I was thinking more like aggressive pinching.
Or something, but just, okay, from this time to this time, here's what we're going to be working on. You're not going to know, just to deaden that thing a little bit. Maybe do some role play.
Could do that.
Because it's gotten to the point where it's terrifying. And there's not a lot that freaks me out. Like, nothing like this. This is full on. I had to really work to keep my bum in the chair and not just be like, I can't do this, I'm going. So
what happened in those instances to help you keep calm?
I don't keep calm. I grit my teeth. I white knuckle it. And mostly I guilt myself because I'm like, they're trying really hard to be nice and I don't want them to feel bad. So I just really try to... I take deep breaths. That I do. The other thing I do is I think about my happy place, which is at the ocean's edge or the water's edge. So I think about waves coming in and going out.
See, breathing deep is one of the things that I absolutely can't do at the dentist because their foul bitterants are in everything.
Yeah, that is true. But I tried it, and they were very kind. Like, everyone there is super great. They're really sweet, and I like to think that we're helping educate the next generation of dentists because they're getting this experience. Yeah. So I'm done until in 2 weeks, I've got a cleaning, which is just as terrifying to me as anything. And then I'm done for 8 months or something, or a year.
Yeah. Whatever.
But I was really proud of myself because this is one of those things that, like, I get nervous at job interviews. I hate making phone calls to people, but I can do them without giving myself an anxiety attack. I don't like it. It stresses me out, but it's fine. It's livable. This is a fight. Right up till before we left, I was like, I just want to call and say I'm sorry, I'm sick, but I can't because I am so fortunate to be able to get this work done
in the first place. Yeah,
at all, because we don't have dental coverage in Canada. We have health, of course, but dental doesn't fall under that. So the fact that we can get it done because it's so expensive is awesome.
Yeah, and for our American listeners, this might seem a little strange, but I am all for as much being covered as possible. Like, health coverage, universal health care for everyone benefits everyone, whether you're taking advantage of it or not. And it's just one of those social things. If everyone is healthier, it means that the society is stronger overall, and you don't have as many endemic problems. And so it feels to me like teeth should be one of those things that should be absolutely covered, because if your oral health is not good, then the rest of your health sort of starts to deteriorate. Like, eating is one of those things that we have to do to live. And so everything passes through your mouth.
Yeah, and it's not just the fact that your teeth can decay and impede your ability to eat. I mean, it impacts the possibility of you having heart attacks. Also, just self-esteem issues in and of itself. I am a strong believer that there should be this umbrella of physical medical coverage, dental coverage, vision coverage, and mental health coverage. Yeah. Everyone in the world should have access to free services. Because it's also
the world is wealthy enough that we could do that if we wanted
figure out how to do it. Yeah.
Well, it's just one of those things that if you look for the money, it's there. Like, it doesn't have to cost much. But unfortunately, a lot of nations put other things ahead of the health and well-being of their inhabitants.
But we're thankful that we have what we have, so I got it done.
This is not a medical podcast, so...
Yeah. No.
To paraphrase one of the other podcasts I listen to on a regular basis. I don't know if you know this. You probably never listened to MTA Cast, but they occasionally go off on tangents and end up saying, this is not a medical podcast.
Oh.
Don't listen to us about any of the advice for medical stuff. Yeah.
So, all right then. I guess the only other thing I wanted to talk about was I've been geeking out hard today.
Have you?
I have been.
All right. About what?
I played a new game today.
Which you can't remember the name of, and I couldn't either.
So I'm going back to it. Mandagon. So we watched Extra Credits, Games You Might Not Have Tried.
13.
Yes, their latest one.
One of my YouTube channels that I really enjoy.
It's one of my favorites. If you like video games at all, or just, game theory or whatever.
Also, when we're done here, I have a video for you.
Sweet.
They just released the second on their new channel.
Which is...
Extra Sci-Fi
channel. They also have an Extra History show.
We've talked about that before.
Yeah, it's pretty good. So anyways, one of the games was this free-to-play game, which Step suggested that I play for my channel today. So I got all in and hit the record button.
That's the Girl in Real Life channel, which we will also be linking.
Mm-hmm. So I jumped in, and it's amazing. It is so much fun. It's very zen. It's a platformer. And
you said it was free to play, right?
It is free to play on Steam. You just grab it. I'll link it down below. It is a platformer with beautiful music. The aesthetic is really nice. You play as a little totem guy, and he's adorable. And I won't tell you what your job is or what you're supposed to be doing, because I thought part of the fun was, okay, so they tell you how to move. It's exactly standard, left, right, up, down, jump, same keys any of your other games work with. But there's no fireballs flying at you. There are no bad guys attacking you. You have to kind of figure out what you're supposed to do. And it's really well done enough that it's not hard to figure it out. I am not good at puzzle stuff, and this is really not a puzzle.
I'm going to go check it out. Absolutely.
But that was the big surprise for me, was how zen it was. It was just very peaceful.
Cool.
And not stressful. I had problems with jumping across high platforms sometimes. My character would slide and fall.
You're not a platformer by nature, though, are you?
No, but I've played enough games that require that mechanic, and on my old computer, the problem was lag. But that's not the problem here. It could either be just I'm not used to the, when you develop the muscle memory, like when I'm playing Crash Bandicoot, I know how long to wait before you hit the next button to get the combo jump. Mm-hmm. It takes practice to get there. It could be that. Yeah,
and like when you grow up on the original Mario, that sort of timing, there are cues that you get to notice from game to game.
So I'll be interested when you try it. Let me know, because I looked and there were a few other people saying the same thing, that they were having problems with it not jumping when you're wanting it, when you're telling it to jump. And it's
possible too that if the cues are off just a little bit from what you're used to, that it'll seem like the controls don't work.
Mm-hmm. But it didn't matter. Yeah. It was well worth playing. The only downside was by the time I went and checked, for some reason my recording program didn't record.
Oh no!
Yeah. So I'm going to go and redo it tomorrow or something. So, yeah, I was sad, but it was super fun. So that was my excitement for the week.
I haven't had any excitement this week. That's not true. We already talked about the draft and having people over to draft in my house and
all of that stuff.
Oh, that felt good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So. Feels good to have a lair.
Mm-hmm.
So.
I'm enjoying it.
The one thing I guess we should probably mention, because we haven't in a couple of weeks, is NaNoWriMo. How's NaNoWriMo going for you?
Ugh, it's not.
You decided not to?
It's not even that. It's that there have just been life surprises, which is going to tie into the podcast today. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I'm still trying to learn how to allocate my time better.
Yep.
With the new paper job, I ran into a case this week of them giving me the wrong paperwork. And so I had to wait 4 hours before I could get started after taking the evening off before, because we had company over.
Right.
So suddenly I am, 10 and a half hours behind where I should be. So I'm panicking.
Where you want to be.
Yeah. So I'm panicking to get that done. And it's going to take a little bit of time, but I'm still committed to doing what I said I was. Mm-hmm. And that's working on the stuff that's not quite there. I have a friend of mine who has read my entire Siren novel, which it is finished. Mm-hmm. And she has given me the first round of feedback, but not just, this is really great. It's all I think I mentioned it last week, all of the nitpicky stuff.
Yeah, that's
so I
sweet.
have started...
really give her one of mine.
Yeah. So I've started going over that. So that is something anyway.
Okay.
But I haven't given up on it. I'm just trying not to stress myself out about it.
So I have written less than 1,000 words,
mm-hmm.
and it's the 10th tomorrow. So this weekend I've decided I'm going to make a push, and depending on the outcome of that push
mm-hmm.
is going to depend whether I'm going to commit to the 50,000.
Mm-hmm.
If I can't get 10,000 words over the weekend, then I'm not going to get to 50,000 this time.
Yeah.
But I think it was day 10 before I really started last.
I believe it was.
Last year too.
Yeah.
And because of whatever, just not being in the zone.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. It's going to be interesting because I have time sometimes that I can do it at work, but
it's not
other
consistent.
times it's busy. Yeah, it's just not consistent. Mm-hmm. And then it's been so busy with the new schedule in the new house, just random things happening. I still haven't tidied up my office entirely.
Yeah.
Although it's getting there.
Yeah.
I mean, there are magic cards all over the place, but it's getting there.
Yeah. So, which kind of moves us into the main topic today. So we have a couple of times, once a month or so ago, and then once since then, talked about our DS relationship, the BDSM within our relationship.
You mean on the podcast?
On the podcast. No, on the podcast. A year, 18 months ago maybe, we renegotiated or started to renegotiate our relationship.
And we said we were going to come back to that on the podcast. Some of you may have noticed that we hadn't.
Yeah. So it's a difficult thing. I kind of akined it to when you start doing something as a job more so, the fun part of it gets left behind. Like, so we're so worried about getting a podcast out to people that we're not focused on any of the stuff for ourselves.
Right.
Plus, life. It is a journey. BDSM is always going to be a journey. And it feels at first blush for both of us like, well, we've completely failed at this. Why are we even talking about it? But I think this is really indicative of what happens in relationships, vanilla or otherwise.
Yeah.
Things ebb and flow. And we've had some experiences this year, like the house moving.
Yep.
Finances, the move from TPOK back to on our own. All of that stuff has created a need to focus on just the very basics of life.
A sense of urgency for the work, and so the relationship sometimes gets takes a back seat.
Yeah, and so I'm sure there are a lot of people out there, be it in a play capacity or a 24/7 capacity, that after time has looked and gone, wow, we don't really do much anymore. We don't have much of that in our relationship, or something's happened and it just stops. So what we want to do...
In some other cases, the structure may be there, and there's still a feeling of... I don't know the word I'm looking for, but no innovation. Like... Sometimes you need a change. Yeah. A routine can become routine. Yeah. So even if you are succeeding in the 24/7 pieces, sometimes that becomes less satisfying.
For sure. So we're going to do a 2-part, as far as I can tell so far.
Okay.
Podcast. Today we're going to talk mostly about figuring out if that's what's happened and examining the problem, trying to figure out where things have come from and kind of looking at what you're going to need to do. And then next week, we're going to talk about how to do it, what some of the pitfalls are, what is the outcome of having been out of things for a while, what may have changed, and how to kind of get more focused and back to it. Okay. So that's the game plan. So first things first is you need to be prepared to be vulnerable, honest, and open. And I don't mean you specifically, I mean the audience in general. Although you specifically and me specifically. You know what I mean.
So when you have identified that there's a problem,
yes,
you're saying.
Yes.
And that's often the first problem. Because in a relationship where there is something long-term that is dissatisfying to one partner or another, often that's the hardest part, is to open up a dialogue. And it's usually coming from the partner or partners who are feeling the dissatisfaction and don't know how to bring it up because they don't want to hurt feelings, or they don't want to stir the pot. Yep. Because everything else is going so well, or etc.
It's become easy.
Yeah.
Life otherwise is great, so why would I make a fuss?
Because I have noticed when everything is going well, when you're really clicking on all cylinders, I guess I'm mixing metaphors here, that communication is easy. You know?
Absolutely, which leads us perfectly into the first thing that yes, you need to do is to...
I am a master of segues.
I
even
noticed.
though I've never ridden one.
Is to figure out why did you stop in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to kind of look at this from two... Like, there are two separate kind of...
Perspectives?
Things that can have happened.
Okay.
So, one is it stopped working from one side of the partnership or another. So something has gone on. Somebody's unhappy. Something like that. Mm-hmm. And the other is more what happened with us, which is logistical. Mm-hmm. So stresses, distance, time, life.
Busyness.
Just kind of gets in the way. So
we see a lot of conversation in forums and sometimes in communications to us about people or couples or groups that are having difficulties in the former. Of someone is not satisfied and doesn't know how to bring it up. Mm-hmm. Especially, it seems like from the submissive point of view, how do I communicate without sounding like I'm questioning the dominant and his role or her role? Mm-hmm. And that's a tough one.
It is. And that's something we're going to get into, mm-hmm. definitely, because it's so important. And there are as many different relationship dynamics as there are people in the world.
Yes.
So different makeups make for different issues. Like for me, when we were in a triad, mm-hmm. I found it much more difficult to say when I was dissatisfied about something in fear, and it was completely irrational of, making one of you pull away from me and well, I guess she's being pushy or she's got an issue, but we don't.
I think if it came down to the same situation as you are now, you would have much less difficulty with it. In our case, you were coming in to a relationship with no real experience with anything regarding polyamory. So you were very uncomfortable to begin with.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. But my point is that there's no cookie cutter answer to anything.
Yeah.
So, I think we're going to start by, you need to examine your problems. So, if it wasn't working from one or both sides, you need to honestly discuss this. So, what we're going to do is talk about some of the things that could have gone wrong and then break down each one and kind of look at it. Now, there's probably as many reasons as there are people, but sure. These, I think, are some of the biggest umbrella ones. So, clear or unrealistic expectations, mm-hmm. not having a clear structure or plan in place, not keeping up ends of the agreement, or agreeing to something you didn't actually want to do, or deciding that it doesn't fit right and then not communicating about it.
I think that's the one that you mostly had trouble with in the beginning of our whole relationship.
Absolutely.
Now, you're scrolling through your notes, but I think we should go back and talk about each one of these individually.
I just finished saying each one of these come up.
Okay.
Did you read the notes that I gave you? Yes. All right. Let's go.
I'm giving her the look.
Trust me, we're getting there.
Okay.
Okay. So, once you figured out where things have gone wrong, and you can start to look and try to repair the issue. So we start with, what if it was a matter of unclear structure or plan?
So what does that mean?
So, for example, we've had a little bit of this at times. It can be anything from, okay, you're the sub, I'm the dom, mm-hmm. and that's what we're doing. And not having any rules, any lists of how that's going to manifest itself, to things where you're not updating your plan.
So it sounds to me like the way this problem would often come about is if you're going from a scene style dynamic into a 24/7 dynamic and just expecting things to be hunky-dory. Mm-hmm. I think that's probably the most common reason this comes about, or even more insidious, if the relationship from play starts to bleed over into 24/7 without the partners discussing it effectively.
Also, this can affect new people new to things, where they're drawing from things they've read or whatnot, and
fantasy fodder that's not really actually plausible.
Yeah. I mean, it's very easy for a dominant to say, just do what I tell you. But in reality, especially in 24/7, there has to be a little more work in the setup than just that.
I don't personally know any dominant submissive pairings who are capable of doing everything they fantasize about. It's just not logistically possible as human beings. Honestly, most of the submissives that I know have some sort of medical issue that keeps them from either endurance activities or full range of motion, you know? And it's interesting that seems to be so common, but it also means that the fantasy you read about in erotica isn't necessarily how things end up in real life. You know?
Absolutely. And it's really difficult for either party member to meet the hopes and expectations if there are no clear boundaries. How are you supposed to, how can I meet your expectations if I don't know what they are?
Right. You end up assuming one thing and then feeling trapped or like there's no way to win if that's not how the dominant wants it.
Yeah, and it's always going to be a work in progress, but you need to find a starting place.
So the starting place is communicate.
Yeah, is to sit down and talk and kind of map out what it is you want. Each of you needs to come to the table with...
And we've done this in our discussion about discussing your dynamic and negotiating before, but yeah, it needs to be all parties involved. Everyone needs to be able to have their desires voiced.
And then later, once you are actively involved in the dynamic, if something comes out that's outside of the plan, this is a place to revisit what to do in that case. And this is also where it's so important that you have communication in place. So we're going to give you a for example.
Okay.
So the rule in this house is if I want to eat something, I have to ask you. And if you want to know why, if you don't know, it has to do with eating disorders, and
We've talked about that in previous
episodes.
episodes.
Yeah, you can listen in previous episodes or send me a message. Sure. I'm always happy to chat.
Maybe we should open up a subgroup on the forum.
Oh, yeah. That's not bad.
Not a bad idea.
That's not
Which
bad.
You still have to add me to, by the way.
Okay, we'll do that after the podcast.
Okay.
So what happens, and this has always been my fear, especially when you're out with other people, what happens if I reach out to you and for whatever reason your phone dies, work is busy, you lose track of time, whatever. What happens if I can't reach you? Now, it's great to say, well, I'd be terrible if I did that to you. But sometimes life gets in the way. And there's something...
sometimes people fall asleep.
You can't avoid it. And it has happened. And for me, I know my dominant. And I know for him, my well-being is important.
Yeah.
So I knew that the answer is... This was a meal. This wasn't a snack. If it were a snack, it wouldn't be as pressing. But it was a meal. And I knew that he would rather see me eat something within the time frame I'm supposed to be having my food so I can take a pill than to not eat. So I tried to make a good choice. And then we talked about it and then decided that, okay, well, here are a couple of things that you can eat without having to worry about it being a bad choice or whatever. So if you ever can't reach me, if something's not working, here's what you do.
Yeah. Now, it probably wouldn't have hurt you to skip a meal one time, but on the other hand, you have medications to deal with.
I also have emotional problems with food, which makes things very difficult.
And making that choice seemed reasonable to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not a big fan of the, well, you... I'm not a big fan of putting you in situations that are going to be uncomfortable just so that I can punish you for making a bad call.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's common enough in fiction. I'm thinking now of 9.5 Weeks, where she went snooping through his stuff, and he knew she was going to snoop through his stuff. And that's just a mind game that I don't think belongs in safe, sane, consensual BDSM. It's maybe a scenario to play with in a scene, but that doesn't have a place in a trusting dynamic.
For me, that now this is just me personally.
It feels like a betrayal.
It feels abusive, and it feels like I'm always going to be on edge, wondering if I am doing the right thing or whether you're just setting a trap.
And see, some people find that sexy in fantasy, but that sort of mentality of not being able to trust your surroundings, that is abusive. And that's not what BDSM is about.
Yeah. So
yeah,
that's how we feel about that.
Okay. So shall we go on?
Yeah. So that's kind of, if you're looking at the structure plan issue.
Yeah, we started with unclear structure or plan, and the answer, short form, is to communicate.
You're going to find that a lot.
Now, maybe you have your structure and plan in place, and you find out that one or another party has had unrealistic expectations. Maybe you both, or all 3 or 4 or 10 of you have, because it's all fun to start out with the fantasy of, 24/7 nakedness and kneeling at the door and all this stuff, and then the mailman comes with a parcel.
Yeah, it does not.
What are you gonna do?
It does not necessarily reflect the reality of life. So, I think the best thing to do here is to grab a notebook and block things out realistically. You sit down. So we use as the example the being naked all the time. Now, there are, if I still...
There are life situations where that works, and I like that quite a bit as an
Sure,
aesthetic.
Absolutely. Like, I used to live on a farm out in the middle of almost nowhere, and that would work fine. But for most of us living in the city, it's just not that practical. But there are ways that you can still have that kind of feeling. So one of my suggestions was have something that when you know your partner's coming home, have it be the rule that when they come in, you have, like a disrobing ceremony or a place where you're taking off your clothes and submitting. So
even a daily coloring.
Yeah, for sure. So there are ways to keep that hot, spicy romance novel, fantasy kind of stuff and have it work in a practical environment. Because the worst part, and I've had this with other people or other person, where you think it's going to be this fantasy novel of a thing, and it just becomes incredibly disappointing and just doesn't work that way. And it's hard. So,
and for our own unrealistic expectations, we're still running into them.
Yep.
There are times... Oh, actually, I've got a great example. In a BDSM dynamic, I like to have my submissive do the things that... Try not to get mad at me here. A traditional 1950s style housewife would. Make your lunch, wash your clothes, put them away, lay them out in the morning maybe. And that sort of thing I find comforting.
Yeah.
And it would be nice if all of those things could happen, but we both work.
Yeah.
And you don't sleep particularly well. So for me, who has to get up at, 5:15 in the morning, when you've only had maybe 3 hours sleep over the night, it doesn't make sense for me to want you to get up then to prep everything and then still be functional for the day.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And it's tough, but that's sort of a compromise that I can deal with because it's the nature of our relationship.
And again,
people are human.
That's something that ebbs and flows because when we were at the other house and when our meals were a certain way, I had your lunch for you in the fridge every day before you went to work.
Yeah.
So we just work on switching things up where we can.
And we're trying to figure out what that is going to be here. Now. Yeah.
So moving on to the next point here, not keeping up ends of the agreement.
So this is one that can lead from unrealistic expectations, because obviously if the expectations are unrealistic, you're not going to be able to keep them up. But also there are just some times where people get lazy, or they forget, or when things get commonplace and routine, sometimes they slip. And that's that's not just a BDSM thing, that's a life thing. I know people who've been in their jobs for 10 years don't do as good a job as the person who's been there half a year.
Yeah, and I'd like to break this up, and we'll talk about submissives first and then dominants.
Okay.
Not that they're particularly different, but just for sake
different
of...
roles, nuances.
Yeah, for submissives, not meeting the expectations often results in a punishment. And it can be really helpful and useful. But if it's less a case of not making the bed, and what if it's a deeper issue? What if it's a problem with actually submitting, of communicating? We're having, bumps ourselves with submission, which we'll get to on the next podcast.
Okay.
And talk about where that comes from and how we are working through it.
Sure.
But it's really difficult sometimes. So you need to step back and you need to re-examine what's going on. And for me, anyway, this is best done for me without the DS in place. So I need to come to a meeting of minds on a level playing field to be able to talk and communicate openly. Because honesty is the most important thing. If it's just a case of I'm not getting up and I'm not making the bed because I'm not structuring my day properly, that is something I can completely understand, after a time is punishment material. But if it's a struggle with something else, if there's something deeper at play where it's more complicated, then it's about communication. You need to be able to talk. And there needs to be a space to be able to do that.
See, it's funny because what you're saying right now, I don't necessarily agree with. I don't think that you need to be outside of the BDSM dynamic to have clear communication.
For me, with this topic, and I didn't want to really get into this topic because it's for next week.
I know, we'll be talking about it in detail next week, but it's funny that I think part of what you're saying right now may be rooted in the problems you're having with structuring BDSM.
I don't know. For me, it's more a case of knowing that I'm not going to be silenced, or, you need to be submitting right now. I need to be able to just talk as two adults and discuss. And I know that there are people who have that as a thing. When we renegotiate things, we don't put the DS in. We talk.
What part of the dynamic keeps you from being able to open up in that way?
I don't know. And we're going to talk about that next week. All right,
we'll talk about that.
I don't want to get into this week. You guys are going to have to come back next week to find out about this.
Because we're actually already running out of time.
Yeah. All right. So in the case of the dominant not living up to their end, there needs to be something in place for the submissive to be able to talk to them about.
Yeah, that's a more difficult thing, I think, to try to process. Because in a BDSM dynamic, obviously, if the submissive isn't doing what needs to be done, the dominant has controls there. But when it's the dominant that's not following through, what are the submissive's controls?
Exactly. I mean, this needs to be something you talk about beforehand. Mm-hmm. When you're sitting down to negotiate, when you're talking about restructuring, because the dominant needs to be able to be honest with themselves and their charge. Like, you need to be able to understand that, there are certain things that you may or may not do on occasion. And I can speak from experience, if whatever the reason, be it depression or just I forgot to punish you for this or whatever. It's hard to be all like, I don't want to feel like I'm trying to be the bossy boss, but this thing here, and how do you do that, Mm-hmm. It's hard, but it needs to be done because mm-hmm. otherwise both people will fall down. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it can create resentment either way. So
what's the answer?
Communicating. You need to be able to start at the beginning and say, okay, we need to make an agreement that if you ever feel like I am not holding up my end as your dominant, that you can send me an email, say, hey, remember that conversation we had at the beginning? I'm kind of feeling this. Can you think about it? Can we talk about it? And both parties need to be able to set aside their pride and talk.
And that's the sort of thing that takes, lots of practice, too.
We're not that great at it yet either. It takes time.
I think this, too, is something that can be done within the structure of the BDSM relationship. But it's a question of, is the dominant too proud to accept initiative from the submissive? Mm-hmm. I think that's a legitimate question that you need to ask yourself if you're the dominant. Am I being too proud here? Am I holding up my end of the agreement?
Mm-hmm. And I know as, somebody who has done managerial stuff, somebody who is a director, when I don't live up to what I'm supposed to be doing, it's embarrassing. And the first thing you want to do is be like, no, it's fine. It's fine. I don't know what you're talking about.
I'm actually dealing with that constantly at work. Mm-hmm. You know what? There's one person, I don't know if I've ever even told you about them, but whenever I bring up a problem, mm-hmm. and it's a problem like that I'm having, I need some sort of reference or I need information, mm-hmm. the first thing she always says is, well, that's not our fault, or that's, blame it on someone. And I'm like, look, I don't care whose fault it is. I just need the information. Mm-hmm. I'm not even trying to fix it. I just need the information.
Yeah.
But the shifting of blame is not helpful, and it just grinds the gears.
Yeah, it sure does. So it's none of it's easy.
No.
But you have to be willing to put forth the effort.
Yeah.
So, all right. So moving on to the last kind of big chunk for this stuff is if you agree to something you actually don't want, or then deciding it doesn't fit. This is... Either one sucks. I'd like you all to not agree to something that you don't want to do. That would be the perfect answer to the solution.
We don't mean something that you're unsure about but are willing to try. There's plenty of that kind of stuff. And this goes for, vanilla people, too. Maybe you don't know if you want to go skydiving, but you know what? You're willing to give it a go.
Yeah.
That's not what we're talking about.
No. What I'm talking about is if you know that a certain aspect... We'll look at the biggest one. If you know that you are not actually particularly interested in the type of submission your partner is into, and you know it's going to make you miserable, but you want to be with the person, so you're going to do it anyway. That's hard.
That's a road to resentment.
Yeah, it is.
On the largest scale, that's the sort of thing you need to look at whether you're compatible as a partnership.
Yeah.
But if it's not that bad, mm-hmm. It's something that you just need to be able to communicate, saying, no, this isn't for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And if it doesn't fit for you, communicate. Mm-hmm. Gritting your teeth and continuing just creates stress and resentment. You need to, for either side.
Oh, yeah.
You need to be able to say, you know what? We need to talk about this because while this was something that seemed to work or we both seemed to want at the beginning, I think it's something we need to revisit.
Yeah, and actually that's another thing that there's first agreeing to something that you know you don't want to do, mm-hmm. and then there's something becoming a problem over time that you didn't realize when you started out, and mm-hmm. that's even more insidious and difficult, mm-hmm. because one party could be going along saying, well, I thought you liked this. I thought this was the pinnacle for you. and now you're telling me that you don't like it after all this time, and there's a lot of pride wrapped up there, you know, and it doesn't immediately present as things have changed. If someone's saying, no, I don't like this anymore, the immediate reaction from the other party might be, well, then they must have never liked it. And that isn't necessarily the case.
No, as you travel through life and your experiences change and you have new experiences and you get older, things just can change.
And this works from the other side too, because I've had there were a lot of things that you thought you'd never, ever, ever, ever be into. And then it turns out that in the right context, or after building trust, you actually really enjoy them.
Absolutely. And there are things in the past that I enjoyed and thought was great, and now I'm just not, it just doesn't do anything for me.
Yeah.
Because I'm in a different place in my life.
Maybe you feel better or worse about yourself mentally, you know?
Or just, likes change.
Yeah.
I didn't used to like Brussels sprouts, and now I love Brussels sprouts with bacon.
I think everyone should give Brussels sprouts another go. Especially with bacon and garlic.
Everything's good with bacon and garlic.
And brown sugar.
But for me, the
onions.
Bottom line with that is you do yourself a disservice by not talking. It could turn out to be something that you can just scale back or build up to or take in a new direction. And you could be missing out on the chance to not only make things stronger, but to do something new.
Help your partners know you better.
Yep, absolutely.
And as a sort of aside on that topic, there are countless episodes of sitcoms that are built upon both parties not liking something but not wanting to say anything about it, and then never realizing until the end that neither of them wanted to be there in the first place.
We were watching How I Met Your Mother, and Robin and her new boyfriend didn't want to go to the strip club.
So it's possible that your partner's tastes have changed as well, and neither of you are willing to talk about it. And even in strong communication partnerships, I'm using partnerships trying to be pluralistic too, sometimes it's still difficult to talk about the things that are uncomfortable.
Absolutely. So the last thing we're going to talk about is, okay, so what happens if, which is more our case, life just gets in the way.
Yeah.
So we're going to break this down into
two. Be like so common for us to talk about.
I know.
Seems like every single week I'm thinking,
ad nauseum.
We should have really done more this week.
Yeah,
together.
I know. So we're going to look at the two types of life getting in the way. One is the rare occurrence. So figure out the factors. Was it a huge life event, a move, a death, an illness, a change, something that you either weren't expecting or was just really big, and it's kind of a rare occurrence or a one-time thing? Or is it life just getting into a routine and things just falling away? So
is it acute or is it chronic?
That's a really good thing.
Yeah. There have been times that, hey, and this isn't just BDSM either.
Nope.
This is vanilla couples have to deal with sometimes something happens and that trip has to be canceled, or that dinner has to be canceled, or date night has to be canceled. You know?
This is also applicable to the vanilla couple that sex just becomes a thing that doesn't happen very often because life gets in the way.
Because they've had kids.
Yeah.
And if those events become chronic, then that's something to reevaluate on a larger life scale.
But my best advice is, if it is a life event, when you're through it, I think it's a really good idea, and this is something we will be doing, to sit and talk and figure out how to put a contingency plan in place for the next time the big sudden thing happens, because it's going to happen.
That would be great. On the other end of things, it's easy to feel put out or hard done by when something gets in the way. And that is only going to make things worse going forward. So this is actually one of those things that playing Magic has really helped cement in my mind. If something acute happens to get in the way, just let it go. Just carry on forward.
My point was, like, for specifically BDSM, like rules stuff. If we suddenly have a big illness in our families that has to be tended to, how can we still... Let's talk about... Okay, so let's say, God forbid, something happens to a parent, and we're going to have to be charged with helping care for them. But we want to make sure that we can still keep that BDSM between us.
Okay, that's a chronic thing, though. I'm talking about the acute things. Like, if someone's in the hospital and you have to go visit them, that's just going, like... You're not going to have a scene that week. And
no, that's not what I'm talking about. Okay. The way I'm defining it is, it's a sudden big thing that is temporarily happening, but has an end time. As opposed to, you're just living your 9 to 5, life has just gotten in the way, it's really easy to get up in the morning, go to work, come home, watch TV, go to bed. And that's kind of the rut we've gotten into a lot. But there are times... in other cases where, maybe your BDSM's going along really great, and then Aunt Edna gets sick, and suddenly it all falls apart. So if we talk ahead of time, and we're like, okay, well, here are some of the things that work for us long distance, so maybe we make sure that we do this.
Sure.
It's a lot of planning, but I think it's worth it.
Yeah, I think so too.
So oftentimes just recognizing what happened can help to not continue to let it happen in cases of, like for us, life getting in the way. We're going to talk a lot more about us and this kind of stuff next week when we kind of dive into what do you do now that you know. But we fell into the rut of getting up, going to work, coming home, playing Magic, occasionally playing if the mood arises. And there was just enough BDSM, there was just enough DS in there that we could still say we were kind of 24/7.
Yeah.
But not enough practical stuff.
To really satisfy anyone.
Yeah. So now that we've identified it, we started a little bit, which you can go back an episode or two ago. We talked a little bit about some of the things that we want to put in place. And next week, we are going to talk more about how to move from this. Deciding that this is the problem, figuring out what the problem is, now where do we go from here?
Yeah.
So that will be next week's episode.
Awesome. So if you have anything you want to share with us, you can always find us online. You can email us. We're on Twitter. We're on Facebook. We're on FetLife. You can go and join the FetLife forum, which is not heavily active yet, but we're getting there. Tams, anywhere else they can find us?
On YouTube? Absolutely.
I would love to see some YouTube comments to this episode when it goes up.
Yeah, you can also find us on Salem's The Draft Cats Tumblr.
Oh, of course.
Yes, and also on the website.
He made a cameo earlier.
Yeah. Is he quiet? Is he still in here?
Yep, he's still there.
Sleeping on the chair quietly now.
And also, if you enjoyed this podcast, could you please go to iTunes and give us a rating? It really helps. It really, really does to get ratings on the podcast, to get those reviews, so that
it means
more people can find us. Yeah. And if you feel generous or feel like we have in some way enriched your lives, you can check out our Patreon, patreon.com/kinkgeek. It's the premier way to support creators who create stuff that you enjoy and appreciate. And for as little as $1 an episode, you can really make a difference to what we can accomplish moving forward.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for spending some time with us, and we will talk to you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us this week. It's always a pleasure talking to you. Just a quick reminder that Kink Geek and everything we do is supported by you, our fantastic listeners, via our Patreon. Visit patreon.com and consider becoming a patron for access to all of our bonus content. See you next time.